Well, it's 7 o'clock, so I'll call this study session of the Lakewood City Council for Monday, June 8th to order. The first item for discussion is a joint meeting with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board to go over the work plan. And if our technology serves us well, we will have Jason Gerwin from the chair of the committee on shortly.
Hello, hello.
Mr. Gerwin, you have the floor. But you appear to be muted.
Okay, now here we go. Hi, Mr. Mayor. Welcome. Thank you for having another joint council meeting with us. On behalf of the Lakewood Parks and Rec Advisory Board, I want to share some accomplishments with you from the past year. It may seem like a long time ago as we've all been locked down in COVID for the past few months, but from there, then Vito will share the work plan, and Alan's going to have some questions, and we'll have a few other board members that have questions. But first, I'll start with the accomplishments for 2019. And so we had hosted the 18th annual Parks Appreciation Day throughout the city. Another great turnout with attendance. The Parks Board reviewed the Parks Code and updated, making recommendations to the council, which you guys all approved. Our summer program update was fantastic. Ever since Sally has come on board, it seems like our special events have been getting bigger and stronger than ever. And that goes for all the staff, Mary and Scott and his staff, to put it all on. The work that our maintenance staff and Parks and Recreation staff does is a yeoman's job. We did a Words of Lake master plan public meeting, and there's a bird walk associated with that. We reviewed tobacco in the parks and the policy changes associated with that. The Lakewood My 311 program, we got that update, and we're real pleased with how that's working out. We reviewed the Angle Lane project with Doug Frazier. We did work on the budget with y'all. And lastly, but not least, it wasn't in 19, but we put a significant amount of work into the legacy plan update just recently being approved by the council, and we thank you for that. From there, I'm going to pass the floor to Vito, and he's going to share our 2020 work plan with you.
Vito, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us tonight, and hopefully this will go smoothly. It's a little hard to do it this way. Our work plan for 2020, Fort Steilacoom Park projects, a number of things are happening. Mary gave us an update last month. Angle Lane is starting that project, repaving that and making improvements there with the new parking lot. Looking forward to working with Nisqually Tribe to add art, culture, and tribal history, which should be pretty exciting. Jason mentioned the legacy plan update, and it was approved here on May 20th. And hopefully we'll have some chance to discuss that and find out your thoughts on that plan and how we're going to use it as a planning and a prioritization document. Parks, the CIP or capital improvement projects update. So much has been done, much more to do. Where are we at? And I'm anxious to see that plan or that list. Ward's Lake Plan update. I know Mary reported that she's currently writing more grants to add more access to this undeveloped and underserved community park and to see what we're going to do there. The Harry Todd Park project update, major changes starting this fall, more access and new shoreline and fishing piers will create more use at this site. Looking forward to that. I know it's been in the planning phase for a long period of time. Edgewater Park project update. Survey work has delayed this project, hoping to move forward soon with completing the master site plan and then looking forward to funding to make those improvements on at Edgewater Park. And hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about your thoughts on Edgewater Park, especially this maybe a thought on the one-way traffic along that shoreline there to help slow down traffic and create a safer place. So maybe we can come back to that as we open it up for discussion. I'd like to now turn it over to Alan, and he's going to talk about COVID and that impact. Alan?
Okay, there we got unmuted. You know, everyone is aware that we're experiencing a tremendous amount of anxiety and stress in our community from a number of factors, which I don't need to enumerate. I'm sure we're all aware. And as we move forward, it's really important that we consider the risks and benefits in our parks system and keep our parks part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem as we open our parks and use them. We know that there's going to be a downturn in revenue from businesses for our city in the future. And we just would like to hear from our city council, what are your priorities with parks when they're really such an important thing right now for the people who haven't been outside and all the anxiety and things in our community. What programs, facilities, and events do you feel as a council are most important that we can't live without? And which ones do you think we might need to live without as we look into the future?
And so it comes back to me, Susan's not here tonight. And so, you know, we did just recently get that legacy plan approved. And for us, that's a major accomplishment. I think it's a tremendous amount of planning and forethought that goes into that. And just want to hear what your feedbacks are, what your next steps are, priorities, that sort of a thing. Then we also just want to have a little conversation. Is there anything that the council has questions for the board, or anything that we can be working on for you in the upcoming year?
All right, questions from council. Get your hand raises out. Anybody?
I did.
I'll do it. Oh,
Mr. Whalen, there's an electronic hand, but we'll take your real one there.
Oh, I had electronic hand, I thought.
There
It's
we
not
go.
showing up. I'm having technology challenges tonight, so I just wanted to thank the group for the work that they've done, and if we could wave a magic wand and get rid of the COVID thing, we would have certainly to have the projects and parks and facilities more open. My question in terms of what you think we need to do is kind of, you know, job one, making sure we've got some semblance of normalcy this summer. What's your thought about the concerts in the park? I know they're going to go forward, but are you guys comfortable with that? With the social distance work we can do?
Yeah, I feel pretty confident that we can. Mary and I know other parks professionals, we sit on a bi-weekly conference call, and it's a lot of directors and deputy directors, managers, sharing their thoughts. And there's many municipalities in the region doing it. And from what I've seen of constituents out in the parks, they seem to be doing a pretty good job social distancing. You have those few head scratchers, but they're kind of the outliers. So I think it's good for the community. And you know, for me, the challenge is, you know, how much of these programs do we want to they're so vital to the community, and I see a reason to have and bring programs back, despite the revenue, even, running some programs at a loss, because it can bring that heart of the community back and re-engage us in this reopening process.
Well, I would agree with you, and I appreciate that response. I think the more we can do to have some normalcy in the open air areas of the park, summer concert series, the market that we're going to be doing, the summer farmers market, and hopefully some night market opportunities, the more we can do of that, the better for the community. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, thank you guys.
Mr. Bulkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Couple, 2 or 3 questions, and you can answer them in any order you like. There was nothing in the report about Chambers Creek Canyon, so I just kind of wanted an update on that, or where we're at on that. The current construction that's supposed to occur, was it this year or next year, and where we are in the planning for the rest of it, and the funding for the rest of it. And then a question of, have we taken down all the closed signs in the parks? Have they all been removed now? Are we cool with that?
So I know some I may need to rely on Mary to answer a little bit, but do you want to take it, Mary, or do you want me to give my best shot? Okay. So to my knowledge, all the signs have been taken down in Lakewood at the parks for opening in regards to COVID. The Chambers Creek, I know we were in the process and planning, and that's where, in regards to the construction, I don't know how the COVID has impacted that construction timeframe. We met a week and a half ago, or a week and a half ago, and I can't remember getting a great update, but we didn't ask either. And then the funding, we would need to rely on Mary to answer that question as well. But she's muted.
Ms. Dodsworth.
Thank you, Mayor. Regarding the Chambers Creek Canyon, we are in the permitting process and the design process. And as you know, we were able to combine phase 1 and phase 2 because we got multiple grants. We're just starting to get engineer cost estimates. So we're taking a look at what we'll be able to accomplish, what we might need to modify. And so we're coming together to put the information together and share with council. But they've had to do all kinds of permitting and testing of soils, geotechnical things. So we are getting to, we'll have some final information to know the time frame for that. So there are 2 different grants that we're working with, a phase 1 and a phase 2. And so we may have to actually divide those out to be more efficient with those resources. Regarding, and the construction wasn't anticipated until next year, just because it takes so long working in that creek. That it's a protected area, it's salmon bearing, there's 2 creeks coming to one to go to the shore. So there's a lot of complicated issues with that. So we're working on that. Regarding the closed signs is that we had changed out all the signs. They still had signs that say the park is open, but there were certain amenities that were closed. We've opened the restrooms, but the playgrounds were still closed. So if people weren't reading the signs very closely, they may have thought that the sign said the park is closed, but the signs had said the parks are open, we want you to be healthy. And we laid out some good social distancing and hygiene suggestions. However, we did get clarification hot off the press from the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department regarding playgrounds. So we may be making a recommendation to our city manager soon regarding opening the playgrounds as early as maybe the end of this week. So we're just finalizing our phase 2 plans, our safety protocols, and making sure that whatever we do is in line with, maintaining a safe and healthy community. So we're just finalizing all those things right now.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Branstetter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Alan, in response to your question about priorities, I think that certainly maintenance needs to be a priority, that we keep up the maintenance in the park so that the open spaces are usable safely and enjoyably to be able to go and do that. And as to programs, I agree with the deputy mayor that we want to have as close to normalcy as we can, but normalcy also includes quality. And I wouldn't want to do a program just to do it if we can't do it to a level that we're proud to be doing it, and be able to go off and do that. So that's kind of, as we look at financial constraints and other things, where I would fill priorities in.
So I had a couple of questions. One has to do with possibilities for use of CARES Act funding, whether remnants of what we have or any future allocation that is restricted to COVID-related mitigations. Have you looked at that, Ms. Dodsworth? For example, do we have restrooms that should be no-touch restrooms that would have the opportunity to upgrade, or some programs that have been impacted but that would incur extra costs because of adaptation?
We are definitely looking at all of our facilities and seeing how they may be modified to support not so much hands-free, but to make sure that we have the proper ability to wash your hands or sanitize after utilizing our facilities. And then regarding programs and services, we are looking citywide at revenue impacts and about needs to continue programs, and a lot of it's based on site specific and safety and access and things like that. So that's where we're at with that. And then regarding the CARES Act, it's just, whether the first round, the criteria associated with that meets criteria of what we're doing. And then, if there's something down the pike, what that is and how we can best use that to support our community and the services that we provide.
The second question I have is with respect to youth programs during the summer, which to go back to some of the earlier comments, I think take a lot of stress and energy off the kids who've been cooped up and their parents who get a break from them a little bit. I know my parents thought it was a great idea to send me off in the summer and come back at dusk. So with the financial impacts, Metro Parks is essentially shut down, is going to be really hit hard financially. That is going to push pressure outward because they have kind of a broader program that attracts people in. It's going to put more impact on municipal park systems, on the county park system. Have you been involved in any discussions about doing things collaboratively so that there isn't overlap? Some people may choose just to shut down their parks programs entirely, and that's going to burden others. So is there any discussion about how to coordinate that so that the burden is shared and there is as little duplication as possible?
As Jason has mentioned, we are chatting twice a week as a multi-county cooperative, but we manage the Pierce County folks. And I'd love to say that everybody's on the same page doing everything consistently, but there's a lot of just different things happening in different communities based on budgets and access and available resources, et cetera. We are planning to do our day camp program as we've done it in previous years. We have announced that and planning to sign folks up, looking at providing support locally, first, and those folks that are returning to our program. I know that Metro has eliminated most things. I'm not sure what they're even going to be providing this summer. So we're looking at this. I know Steilacoom is also doing their regular program. UP has, canceled all of their programming the last several years. So, and I'm not 100% sure on what Pierce County is doing. So we're not really doing things collaboratively as in sharing, but we are communicating as to who's on first and different best practices so that we can make sure that we're serving our communities as best we can. And, you know, our program fills every year. And so we want to make sure we're serving our local families first so that we can take care of Lakewood people first. And then fill in the blanks with folks that are in our area.
Any other questions for the group? Mr. Gerwin?
I just wanted to make a comment on the use of the CARES funding, and I wanted to thank Mr. Brandsettler for recognizing how much of a priority maintenance is right now, because everyone may be staying home. The parks are still getting hard, but a lot of times maintenance and funding gets overlooked. But the way we're looking at something in Federal Way is a way to set up our maintenance folks using the CARES money. Because in our situation, we've had to separate our work groups to minimize the transmission and the contact. And so we're going to try to use some of that CARES money to set up the maintenance vehicles similar to a police vehicle, where you've got a laptop access in the vehicle, be able to sign on to the work order system, be efficient, because a lot of times the maintenance staff, the truck is their office, but yet there never seems to be the funding to truly outfit them the way and with the expense that we do for the police. And so this might be a great opportunity to bring the maintenance crew and staff into a better technology situation with some of that funding.
Thank you. Do we have any other further questions from council or comments? Don't see any hands. I'd like to thank the committee. You're always thoughtful. You have a high degree of expertise that we really appreciate getting for free. And the commitment you have is admirable. So we hope as we encounter the budget difficulties and the storm that lays ahead, that we can preserve as much as the ongoing activities as possible in our parks. Because I, for personally speaking from one council member, I go back to my old three-course meal: public safety, infrastructure, and parks for dessert. And everybody likes dessert. So thanks again. We appreciate your taking time tonight, and be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We now move on to a review of human services funding with Mr. Humphreys.
Computer.
Got to start video and audio. Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, council. Thank you for the time. This evening, I am presenting two recommendations from the Community Services Advisory Board regarding the 2021-22 biennium for human services funding. The first recommendation will be to use the funding areas, the application, and the rating criteria that I presented in April, which remain pretty much unchanged. And the second recommendation is regarding the timeline for releasing and reviewing applications. And the recommendation is going to be to stick with the existing timeline for reasons I will describe. I'll also give you an update about the Workforce Development Initiative and present an option to support that. I've included a few attachments. They are mostly the same documents I showed you, or we went over in April, so I do not intend to go over them in too great detail, but obviously I would be happy to answer any questions you might have. The first two documents are the two I always bring you every time you see me. The first is the summary of the 2019-2020 biennium programs currently supported by Human Services funding, the outcomes from 2019 and the goals for 2020. I did add a tally on the right side of how many children and youth and how many seniors 65 and over we currently support, since that came up in our discussion in April. At the bottom, you'll notice I included a tally of those demographics, including and excluding food, since those larger numbers can skew the results. The second document you've also seen lots of times is the summary of all the organizations that have received human services funding in descending order of how many total bienniums during which they received funding. This is always a reminder of why CSAB is a little reluctant to recommend changes without a clear reason, because even when we added a more rigorous rating and review process over the last biennium, we ended up with largely the same partners being supported, which we take to mean we have the right partners at the table doing some of the best work in Lakewood. Next, we have the current draft of the application. At the beginning, we have the 5 funding areas recommended by the advisory board, which are similar to the 5 we currently fund, but a little bit clearer. One reason CSAB is recommending we stick with the existing timeline, which I'll get to, is so far, COVID-19 has not created new needs in the community, but it has exacerbated the existing ones. So this has consistently been the case in our virtual community collaboration meetings, at least so far. By the fall, it might be clear that some of these funding areas are more critical than others, but we don't think there will be needs outside of these definitions. The application and rating criteria are the same I included in April and very similar to what we used in 2018. Basic components are, we ask about program design, we ask about collaboration and partnerships, we ask about how they determine what their outcomes are, how they ensure quality and impact, accessibility, eligibility, we ask how they collect data, we ask for a pretty straightforward budget. That's one thing we cleaned up a little bit. The only change since the last time you all saw me was we added a question to the bottom of the last page about whether they have received any CARES Act relief funds for 2020. This is not a scored question, but should help us gather some useful information. So going back to the memo, the current timeline for the application is to release the application on July 6th, conduct a workshop on July 15th. We would receive applications by the end of August. CSAB members would rate applications and come together 2 or 3 times in September and early October to deliberate. And we would make an initial recommendation to council at the end of October. So it's actually a fairly tight timeline to be able to have contracts in place by January, considering all these steps. So that's why if we thought the needs in the community were going to be outside these definitions, and if we thought those new needs would be evident by the fall, then CSAB might recommend waiting and deploying an accelerated timeline later in the year. But since we believe the severity of some needs will change, but will still likely fall within these definitions, CSAB recommends keeping the existing timeline. So to summarize, the 2 recommendations they sent me to give you are to continue with the 2020 timeline that we currently have now to be ready for January, and to maintain the current 5 funding areas that we described them, and the application and criteria. And let me briefly, before I take questions, update you about the Workforce Development Initiative and what I have here for you, because I think that might answer questions you might have about needs in the community and responding. Part of what I presented in April was the relationship between the human services funding areas and the Lakewood's Promise work plan. And we also presented how human services complements the city's overall strategy to address affordable housing and homelessness. So this last attachment is a summary of that Workforce Development Initiative. I won't read through this document in its entirety. I will say the workforce development sector is unique in a lot of ways, but 2 in particular. First, it provides a clear opportunity to solve a problem, which we're always looking for. We have employers who need workers, and we have workers who need living wage jobs to be able to afford housing and basic needs. There's a national issue with whether or not we have enough living wage jobs, but we can cross, that would be a happy bridge to try to cross when we get to it. And for every worker that goes from minimum wage to $25 an hour with benefits and has financial coaching, that is an actual sustainable solution that we're all excited about. And we would be happy to replicate as many times as we could. The second way this sector is unique is that it's one of the few sectors that is already well-funded and has lots of partners to leverage. We have the school district, there are multiple 2-year, 4-year colleges, we have employment security, Workforce Central, Worksource partners and affiliates, and we have the employers themselves. So the opportunity for Lakewood is not so much directly funding training or finding funding for training, but funding the capacity to organize the various resources and communicate clear pathways to the community. So ideally, rather than go to someone from Springbrook working part-time, minimum wage with no benefits and saying, go to college, get educated, we would say, here are 5 training programs with a demonstrated track record in getting somebody a job at these employers in Pierce County at these wages. Then we have people who are on a mission, and the goal then of Lakewood's Promise and the community collaboration is to identify support services to help them complete a training program. So this document describes, we've had the first couple meetings so far with the colleges working through this 6-step plan. And it has become clear just how much work there is to be done. It's a lot of gathering information across sectors, some of which we don't have readily available, and finding ways to communicate that to the community and also to help create that college-going culture we all talk about. So the second half of this attachment is a first draft of what it could look like if we were to allocate a portion of human services funding for a separate RFP for workforce development. This would be a more targeted RFP on its own timeline, so it could wait until the fall when we see what other applications we get from the normal process, which is why it is not a formal recommendation yet, but I wanted this to be on your radar as an option. So with all that, that's all I have for you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions, council? Mr. Whalen.
Well, thank you, Brian. I think it's very good work. I'm going to support, obviously, the recommendation on your timeline for the human services proposal and funding. I'm really interested in the workforce development piece that you've articulated. I think that's great work, and I very much appreciate the collaboration that we're pursuing with regard to the technical and community college presidents, because they've got their ear to the ground. The other thing I'd throw out there, it's something I actually chatted with them as well, is the workforce development piece for sure, but there are opportunities maybe where either the business community through the EDB or others might be able to help fund some scholarship assistance for students in needed programs at the community and technical college to get them to the point where they're skill trained to avail themselves of those jobs that we want to connect them with, that $21, $22 an hour piece. So there's an opportunity out there that I'm happy to kind of chat with you about. In terms of whether we're kind of on the right track and how we might assemble this and put it together, I'd encourage you to reach out to Helen McGovern, who is at Workforce Central right now, and she's kind of doing the interim work there. And she's also very familiar, obviously, with Lakewood and our role as a council. She might be of invaluable assistance in kind of giving you thoughts on how that could come together.
Great, thank you.
I think Helen's a good contact for that, but she transitioned out of her interim role. Just in the last few days.
Oh, goodness. Well, I'm behind the times, I guess, for the last
Retired
week.
again.
But she still would be great contact for institutional knowledge for sure.
Okay, well then. And I come from there. I was with them for 3 years, and so I still have Deborah Howell is kind of a person I work with closely. But
yeah,
whoever the new interim is, I'll be connected with. Yeah.
Mr. Branstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Brian, like the deputy mayor, I really like the workforce development attachment 5 that you submitted to be able to go and do that. And I particularly like the fact that it's that it would be an RFP where we would be looking for specific things to do that led to sustainable solutions to a need and a problem we've identified. And I appreciate the work that you and the staff put in to bring this recommendation to us. But as you have said, and it is fairly, it seems to be, it is by and large, a recommendation to use timelines and processes that are as we have. Is that the fair evaluation of it? And I would suggest to you and the other council members that this is not a normal year, and this is maybe a year where we as a council should take a look at, do we want to continue to handle our 1% of the general fund contribution to social services in the same way that we have? A couple of reasons why this might be a good time to take another look systemically at it is we don't really know what the funding is. We're waiting on the city manager to bring us sequence of revenue projections. And unlike most years going into a biennium, we're not probably looking at 2 years of an upcoming biennium that are going to look very similar revenue-wise. And so this may be a time for us to address some systemic questions that we should ask ourselves about how we do this. The first is, we have since 2015, actually since 2010, since I got on the council, been advocates of investing in human services on what's the peanut butter approach of spreading small amounts of dollars across a lot of areas. And we have been in a system of where we don't ask for specific outcomes. We say, tell us what you can do in these programmatic areas, but we don't specify what we want to see as solutions or outcomes in those. And I think that particularly using the model that Brian has brought us with the family workforce plan, that it is possible to take a look at some of these areas and say, this is where we want to be moving towards, not just asking providers, what do you want to do, and tell us what your outcomes are. And the outcomes are usually number of people we touched, which doesn't actually in the end tell us, are things getting better? I'm not particularly thinking that with the reduction in revenue and that we're going to have, that we can continue to sustain all 5 strategy areas, as well as perhaps set some money aside for the family workforce development proposal that is there in front of us. And I'm also not sure that the way that this year is going to work out, that there aren't some changes that are going to happen with respect to needs and respect to resources. The county council, when they were considering the 1% for mental health tax, didn't pass it, but they did pass a resolution that called for them to be writing a plan to do that, and for them to come back and address before the end of this year whether they were going to impose a tax. And some of our thoughts on that were that if they were to do it, then that would become a funding for some programs that would address some needs in Lakewood, and we perhaps don't need to directly go and address them with human services funding until we see what that landscape. If they don't pass anything, we may need to invest in that. But if they do, we may be able to link in to what they have. So, I would suggest that rather than just moving forward with a timeline that existed in the past, with a model that in the past, that perhaps we look at getting the city manager's estimate about what 1% would be, that we move forward on a timeline as is proposed, but with only 50% of that funding, to identify some programs in maybe only 2 or 3 of the areas. I don't think we really need to keep food as an area in this time, because there seem to be a lot of resources sprouting up around the issue of food. And I think that behavioral health and stabilization are important, but that if we were to say that we would go on this timeline with 50% of the funding, and say that we're looking for just 2 or 3 of the strategies to be funded with perhaps 6 or 7 programs, then we have that other 50% to really not assume that things aren't going to change significantly, but actually take a look at what they are to see whether there is, do we want to fund the workforce program? Is there another program we would like to fund in a similar way with a separate RFP, with being able to go and do that? Or do we just want to do another round of applications? And I would also suggest that this year we return to writing 1-year contracts. And part of that has to do with hopefully 2022, the 2022 1% number will be significantly different than the 2021 1% number. It isn't just easy, whereas when they've been very similar, we've just rolled the same contracts with the over. But if recovery goes well, or even steadily, that we could see a 2022 1% number bigger than that. So I would really like to take, not having staff have to go back and readjust this, but maybe we would want to take another session, gather our thoughts together about, is this the year to do some adjustments and reform of the process while maintaining the commitment to 1%? And rather than just approving this recommendation next week, but maybe coming back with our mix of ideas in 2 weeks and then approving a recommendation going forward. I'm in terms of the next budget, we can put into the budget the 1% to there. We don't have to have every contract that we want to do in stone, as we have in most years, approved to be able to go and do that. I think that there are ways to do that. So again, I think there's an opportunity here to do some good work that could lead us in some good, sustainable solution directions for the community. And this is a year with some uncertainties, that it's a good time to maybe take that look and do something rather than just be on autopilot. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Any other comments or questions?
I'll say something.
Mr. Whalen,
Yeah, no, I appreciate Mr. Branstadter's thought and comment, given the time we're in. I guess my thought that potentially could be a lot of change for the dollars we're talking about in this particular 1% program, and our setting aside of sufficient funds to have the flexibility might be better served by the 1.79 million that we have to discuss here shortly, with regard to the use of the COVID relief funds. So my thought is, while I think it's well-meaning to, leave some powder off the table, so to speak, for emergent needs, I think we've got some monies we can do that this year with the COVID funds, and perhaps we want to have some flexibility with that. But given that many of these providers may be in need of these funds, and as Brian indicated, the need hasn't changed per se, it's just exacerbated by COVID. I'd hate for this to be the time that we pull the plug on any of the 1% monies right now. But that's just my thought.
yeah, I tend to agree with Mr. Whalen with respect to going forward, at least to this year. I think there's some merit in considering only doing a 1-year program, because things are changing so rapidly and we don't know how the need will change and how the budget will change for that second year. So it would be kind of like guessing or operating in the dark to do that. I do like the idea of a workforce initiative. I don't know, for Mr. Humphreys, if you've had you seem to have some experience in the area, whether you've, when you hear about jobs programs, I think there are 87 different federal programs. So it's the ability to coordinate and act as a navigator for people is attractive to me. I was involved with Goodwill for years. They're one of the folks who may very well be a bidder on an RFP like this. Has an inventory been done of what, who the potential providers are?
That's what I have been working on with Pierce College and Clover Park, and they're still gathering that information, because my pitch to them was, if you can get me at least 10, ideally a list of 20 programs between the two of you with a track record of getting jobs, then we can start the rest of this process. But if all we have right now is this kind of generic idea, go to college, get educated, that's not enough for someone who's already low income, working multiple jobs, to try to make all the sacrifices it takes to pull that off. So they say they have a lot of that specificity, and they're gathering that information for me now.
I know one thing, for example, that Goodwill programs did when I was chair was we had a youth build program that was aimed at really dropouts who'd been in a little trouble, who could be channeled toward the construction industry. And a couple of the successes were people who were hired at extremely well-paying jobs and were really good workers for Tucci and Sons here in Lakewood. So there was the anomaly I remember about that is the best place to recruit seemed to be barbershops. So recruiting was down for COVID, I guess. I also have I try not to micromanage, but there's one thing that popped out at me. Do we have a legal requirement that we publish everything in the News Tribune? Because, they're pretty expensive and nobody looks at it. And it'd be much more effective just going out in and it isn't even a newspaper of general circulation, if you want the real definition of that now. They don't put their boxes out anywhere or stock them. So I think that the sooner we can get away from that and just have direct mail people and email them and post it. That's all the News Tribune really does, is put clicks out. So just a thought. Any other questions from council?
If I may, I might just point out, I wasn't here in the before times when we used to do annual contracts. I can tell you the Community Services Advisory Board wouldn't love that idea, just because of the amount of the sheer volume of hours that goes into that process. So if that's what's best for next year, then that's fine. But I would also point out, part of making something like, I'm a part-time employee right now. And so there's just to the degree that we are doing this again next year, that takes away from my ability to do things like help the Workforce Development Initiative move forward. So not a reason not to do it, but just considering that time will come from somewhere, and it's a lot of time. And in addition to things, there are going to be other grants and things that come up that it'll be great to have the capacity to work on.
Okay, thank you.
That's good feedback.
And the amount of money, the point of the presentation in April is that the amount of money we require to make the Workforce Development Initiative is not all that significant because it is a well-funded initiative already. In fact, I'd like to seek matching funds for whatever we might allocate for something like that.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions, comments from council?
I just think it's a great program to push forward.
Agreed. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Humphreys.
Thank you.
Ms. Wadsworth is supervisor. So we'll move to the next item on our agenda, which is a review of the CARES Act funding potential uses. We have Ms. Spear for this.
Get this thing.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Tiffany Spear, and for some reason, the video at least is not showing on my end. I don't know if you can see me or not. Oh, there I am. Okay. Thank you. And what we have tonight is a revisit to the conversation that was had at the last study session regarding the Coronavirus Relief Fund, or CRF fund, in the amount of $1.79 million that the city of Lakewood has been awarded based on its population of a little over 59,000 people coming through the state of Washington. And so tonight, what's going to be presented to you is an updated version of the budget that was discussed last time that reflects both updated information gathered from throughout the city, from various departments in terms of costs to date. And then it also reflects an updated conversation about where money might go based on your direction from May 26th. So I'm going to share my screen. Give me just one moment, please. So as I mentioned last time, this is continuing to be a team effort. And so I'd like to thank Jeff Gum, Brian Humphreys, and Becky Newton, all of whom have continued to assist with this effort. Just an aside, the council probably is already aware of this, but on May 7th of this year, the city of Lakewood secured what's called a FEMA Public Assistance Grant through the Washington State's Military Department for COVID-19 related costs. And there's a couple of differences between this and the CRF fund, which we're going to be talking about in more detail. But to summarize very quickly, it's a much longer time frame where costs may be allocated toward it. It goes all the way through March of 2024. It does have a non-federal match. So rather than being able to get reimbursed for 100% of the costs, it is something where FEMA would reimburse 75%, and then the city would be responsible for identifying 25% non-federal match. There is no limit on the amount that can be requested by the city. Based on what's happened through May 31st, if the city were to pursue this route, there's calculated about $29,000 in eligible costs through the end of May. However, the city does recommend not using this grant at this time because the COVID Relief Fund does reimburse 100% and there's no requirement for a local match. So jumping to the CRF award itself, this was talked about a little bit again on May 26th, but just a reminder, this is a $1.79 million grant. Its reimbursement timeframe is between March 20th of this year and October 31st. Of the eligible costs, 100% are reimbursable. And just a note on the side, based on Department of the Treasury guidance, the CRF payments cannot be used for capital improvement projects which aren't necessary for explicitly relative to COVID-19 public health emergency. So a couple of other items out of the Treasury's guidance. First of all, transfers can be made by the city of Lakewood to other units of government, assuming that it is also a necessary expenditure on the receiving end. Secondly, grants can be made to small businesses, and they can also be made to individuals facing economic hardship as a result of COVID. So it's recommended this evening that the council approve by motion at its next regular meeting the contract for the 1.79 million in coronavirus relief funds from the Department of Commerce, and also that the city approve by motion or by resolution the CRF budget, and then any funding priorities it may want to identify. There are several other grants floating out there which are available now or maybe in the near future. The Economic Adjustment Assistance Fund through the EDA that is available now. It's got a rolling application date. City staff did have a discussion with PSRC representatives last week about this. And so we're starting to gather information and making a decision to go to the city manager with a potential recommendation there. The FEMA Public Assistance Grant that I just mentioned, the HEROES Act and the SMART Act, both at the federal level, have been talked about, but have not yet been enacted. And then there may be other sources coming up in the near future. So getting back to the CRF grant, there's a test that's been put together by the Department of Commerce, 5-point test for the use of by recipients to decide whether or not something is eligible. Is the expense connected to COVID? Is it necessary? Is it not used to fill a shortfall? Would it not exist without COVID, or would it have the expenditure been made for a substantially different purpose? And was it not included in the budget approved as of March 27th of this year by the jurisdiction? So if you'll recall your discussion and direction back to staff on May 26th, there was a request, first of all, to increase the overall share of the monies going to external, meaning individuals, families, and then businesses allocations. I would also show here for you that based on the internal work done to gather information about what costs there are or there may be, the payroll costs have been actually changed since your packet was put together. And you see here that the payroll costs went up by almost $60,000. The personal protective equipment number also increased, as did the facilities costs. And while I'm remembering this, the discussion that was had earlier this evening with the Parks and Rec Board and with Director Dodsworth, these numbers do incorporate facilities improvements and PPE for the parks and recreation facilities, as well as City Hall, for instance. So here you see an updated summary budget, and you'll see that the reserve has been reduced in order to cover some of the other costs. The payroll is through May 31st, technology, facilities, and personal protective equipment. So internal costs are at 35%, and then the external costs are now at 63%. There is an increase to public partnership dollars, and I'll explain that in just a moment. There's an increase in the amount available for business assistance. And then there's the money set out for economic resilience for families and individuals, which has been increased. And then the domestic violence and substance abuse, youth mental health, and the food access via food banks numbers are all there as well. One note on the bottom here, this isn't incorporated into this grants just because there's no way really to do it at this point, but just a reminder to council that as these grants are received, be it this CRF fund or any other COVID-related dollars, there will need to be administration done by the city about all of these, either as a recipient or as a distributor of the funds to third parties. And so that's going to be something that the staffing resources will need to somehow handle at the city level. So giving you a little more detail on this new updated budget, again, the reserve there is at about $31,000. The payroll reimbursements now are through May 31st and show that 140,000. Technology are the upgrades required in buildings and meeting facilities, as well as the teleworking systems and the remote work systems for those that are offsite, such as on-site inspectors or code enforcement officers. Then the facilities, you'll see here a number of things. The deep clean of the buildings, the retrofit, and this does include the parks facilities as well, as I mentioned. Redesigning, if you will, public access, so everything is available through coming to the first floor, so the public is not having to go to the second or third floor at City Hall. The plexiglass shields number is there. Reorganizing staff setup within the buildings, installing signage at parks and other public-owned venues regarding encouraging proper social distancing and other personal behaviors. The 6-foot distances marking within the public spaces, And then last version of this, there was a number in here to retrofit the city's HVAC systems, but the contractor that would have provided this recommended not doing that. So it's been removed from the budget. The last piece of the internal one is the personal protective equipment. And you'll see there again, there's the on-site staff, the off-site staff, the needed equipment for city events such as farmers market or summer camps, the public facing counters at city buildings, and then the stockpile required in the future. The number that was originally in the budget for containers or where they might be stored has been removed because facilities were able to identify existing locations where that could happen at no cost. The external budget also has been updated. There's been a request provided by several of our partners. So West Pierce Fire and Rescue has submitted a request for $142,000. The Korean Women's Association is asking for dollars to help with payroll and PPE for the in-home care and meal delivery services they provide. The public libraries have requested the $17,500 you see there. Then there's a number of other things as well included for a total of $224,500. Business assistance, basically making sure that resources are provided to the Lakewood businesses in multiple languages, both hard copy and online, as well as in-person business outreach is also planned, and providing just an easy one-stop shop, if you will, to find local, state, and federal resources. Then there's the grant, which is the lion's share of what you see in business assistance, grants or loans for low-income businesses. And then there's also the PPE and other supplies for businesses within Lakewood. I believe Ms. Newton last time did explain that Lakewood is closely working with Pierce County, and for instance, the PPE mask distribution that's happened recently, she's been very involved in that along with the Lakewood Chamber. And then you see the human services allocation at the bottom there. The lion's share in that category is the economic resilience for families and individuals. So rent and utility assistance, for instance. If there are those who do not have, for whatever reason, reimbursement through some other venue for their payroll, they would maybe be able to get some living costs as well. And then you see domestic violence and substance abuse, youth learning loss and mental health, and the food access via the food banks. So all of these numbers under human services have been vetted through not only the Community Services Advisory Board, the community collaborations, but other resources that Mr. Humphreys has at his disposal. So where we sit tonight is just looking at next week potentially to move by motion and resolution the execution of the grant itself with the Department of Commerce, as well as authorizing budget allocations, whether they be exactly what you see in the recommendation or how the council may want to amend that. So that is the presentation, Mr. Chair, unless you have any questions for me.
I'm sure there will be questions. I'd like to give this a little context as to how fast it changes, a little background. As of now, a week ago, the U.S. Treasury guidance indicated that it was the intent of Congress that the money that came with the state to the state should be shared with its constituent jurisdictions that weren't over 500,000. You remember that in Pierce County received an allocation because it has over 500,000 people. Seattle did, and the state pretty much gets everything else, at least as far as Western Washington goes. The state allocated out of the $2.1 billion that it received, the per capita payment that we received is part of 300 million of that. So that means there's a big chunk still sitting at the state that hasn't been used. The Treasury guidance said that it was the intent that 45% of that should be, it didn't say must, should be shared with local jurisdictions. There's suspicion that the state is sitting on a large chunk of that, hoping that it will be able to backfill budget at some point. But the Treasury guidance is, if the Treasury guidance was followed, that would result in another $600+ million being distributed for the benefit of local jurisdictions. It doesn't have to be a per capita payment. So that's one thing that's still in the mix, so that we may have to react to some further distribution. The second thing is that over the weekend, I got word from Congressman Hack of his take on what's happening in Washington. They're going to do a lot of budget work in 3 or 4 working days before the 4th of July. It's his opinion, or his intelligence, I should say, that on the Senate side, Mitch McConnell doesn't have a cohesive block of Republican senators that's large enough to keep anything from moving through, so that there will be a CARES 5. It will not be $1 trillion. It may be half of that, but it will not be $1 trillion, is his take. And it hopefully, in his opinion, he's fairly confident that it will provide some relief for budget backfill for lost revenues passing through. So we'll see. But he was confident that there will be one more bill. And given that it's an election year, it's very likely. And his rationale from that was that there are Republican senators from Republican states with Republican governors who have essentially broken away and said, I know there's going to be a lot of money wasted in places like Chicago. That was his example. But my state really needs it. We're in a world of hurt. So as we adapt, I'd also like to give you, I guess, a little bit from the county side. 2 of these things that are in here are things that are robustly funded by county CARES Act money. One is food, and there will probably be more for that. There's a lot of money for food around. KWA meal assistance may be an overlap. They have a request into the county that is certainly hasn't been rejected. And I think it's progressing. And there's another, I think, $1 million being spent on PPE to distribute to businesses so that that pipeline can keep going. And in that instance, part of it's actually getting it. And the county has a pipeline that's fairly robust. And so it may be that we're standing in line to get the PPE if we even if we budget it. So that's how fast it's changing. So the short of that is, irrespective of what pot you want to put it in, I think we need to leave it fairly flexible and use general categories with those budget lines as a guidance, because it may be different a week from now. So, question, Mr. Whalen.
Thank you. Just a question for Ms. Spear and maybe for the council as a whole. So would it be inappropriate to tweak the language under business assistance and/or coordination with public partners to include certain nonprofits that we historically, with lodging tax money, support, but due to COVID, they may have now unique needs? I'm thinking principally, I got an email from Lakewood Gardens, for instance, and because of the need for the distance stuff, they could use some assistance with some upgrades in technology that they haven't otherwise budgeted for in order to conduct Zoom meetings or programmings for seniors or others to be able to adequately engage in Lakewood Gardens, for instance. There may be similar needs like that at Lakewood Playhouse. So my thought is, I'd like to make sure, if appropriate, that we could include either coordination with public partners to include and nonprofits, or something under the business assistance category that would talk about in-person funds for grants, loans, low-income businesses, and/or nonprofits for rent, lost revenues, COVID-related expenditures, including technology or something like that. So the 2 questions, Ms. Spear, is that allowable? And B, does the council think that that might be okay? And I'm thinking if we were to reallocate monies, we might take 10 grand from the 275 on economic resilience for families and individuals, make it 265 and have a category of 10 grand for some nonprofit supports in the business category.
Well, there's a couple of I'm sorry.
I say her name and she disappears.
Yeah, it's like magic.
I don't know why my camera's doing that tonight. I apologize. So, Mr. Whalen, I did do some initial research on the question of whether nonprofits can be funded through these dollars. And basically, both the Department of Commerce in the state and also the Department of the Treasury are silent. But they do highlight the fact that business reimbursement is eligible. So we'll continue to do that research. At this point, I would say the answer is not no. But we just haven't found anything that explicitly says one way or the other for nonprofits. I think they fall into the business category. And so we can certainly move numbers around and incorporate that into the language that would be explicit in the budget.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I guess my thought is some of the programming that seniors and others are missing might be more accessible if we could have better technology assistance for those nonprofits. So that's the thought.
Mr. Bulkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hey, Tiffany, just a background question then. We already did the CDBG money for the business loan program. Do we know the results so far, how that's gone?
I'm going to ask that Ms. Newton respond to you. I know that the process has gotten underway, but I don't know if they've got any sort of results they can report back on yet.
Okay, so
Becky,
Sorry, I just trying to unmute there.
I saw you clicking.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, so with regard to the deferred no interest loan, what you're asking about, correct? We are in the process of finalizing one additional translation for that. So ultimately, when we finish that, I believe we're going to be having a conversation, Jeff Gum and I, with Bryn tomorrow about the advertising, social media, and posting the applications for the loan. And we're trying to get that out by the end of the day, Wednesday, no later than the end of this week. So at the same time, then we'll be starting all of the outreach to get the loans out on the street and get folks to apply for that program.
okay, so the reason I ask is I'm trying to see if the amount that we put in there is going to be sufficient, because at the county level, it is a very popular program, although it is very well funded, and businesses here in Lakewood can access that program. So I'm wondering how we came up with the number that's suggested, and I don't have it right in front of me. Was it 450? Is that going to be sufficient in your mind, or is it just a swag? And
right, so it's hard to say, obviously, but based on the number of applications for the Pierce County funds, and also there was obviously the Working Washington grant that was applied for, and there was for the Pierce County, I believe the numbers were 45 to 50 applications for Lakewood, and I think 27 received some type of funding. And so the loans obviously aren't as attractive as the grants. And I don't believe that they may have reached out to as many folks as we may distribute to in Lakewood. So I'm based on that, and I think there was over 4,000 applications for the EDB for the Working Washington grants, of which only 36 were awarded. So I know there's a lot of demand out there, and so You know, it's just kind of an estimate of what we think might be the need out there at this point in time.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Farmer.
I am all for infrastructure, and it's difficult to do our jobs if we don't have the right tools, particularly in a brand new situation that calls for a whole new set of tools, which means we need to outfit ourselves, we need to outfit our public partners, and we need to help get the foundation in place. I have some questions though about how many real, I'll call them real people, how many folks out there might we be able to help with this 1.79 million. I look at you have a lot of detailed information in the community I'll call it community, the rental area, human services needs, the economic resilience, $275,000 for rental assistance. I note that rental assistance comes up both in the business category and in the economic resilience for individuals and families. So 275,000 roughly, depending on the amount of the mortgage or rent, it would be 154 people or 200 people. I'm curious for the business rental portion, which looks like it covers more than just rent possibly, and there's 450K set aside for that. Do you have any estimate about how many businesses you might be able to help with rental assistance with the 450K?
Again, I would turn to Ms. Newton if she can assist
Yes.
with the answer there.
Yeah. Okay, Ms. Farmer, thank you. So I think it's hard to say. I really don't know what that number is. However, I've done quite a bit of outreach to a lot of the businesses that have having trouble meeting rent. And most of them, there's a mix, obviously, of the monies that could be used for the uses, including the rent, assistance with payroll, operating costs, and so forth. It's really hard to say how many until we get it out there on the street. But I would say that, you know, of the 50 businesses I've talked to, there are probably, I would say, 10 of them that expressed a need to have some kind of assistance with rent or utilities along those lines. But like I said, it's really hard to say at this point. And I will say that, as I mentioned at the last council meeting, RPAI is renegotiating all of their leases. And so all of the folks in Town Center have some issues with paying rent. And so that seems to be the highest need or one of the highest needs for businesses.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I think Mr. Gum had something to add to that.
Yeah, I wanted to tag on to Councilmember Whalen and Councilmember Farmer's questions. So the one thing that I think is important to remember is the CDBG funds that we reserve for economic development business assistance do require low-income employees being assisted. So there may be an instance where a business may not qualify because their employees are just slightly above the 80% AMI. So with that program, we may not capture assistances to all businesses. They may not all be eligible.
Okay, thank you. Back to Ms. Farmer.
Thank you. I agree that these are the right categories, and I don't want to micromanage, but I do want to note that I am concerned about putting a lot of money into infrastructure, and then we might be losing people's livelihoods if we're not able to put enough money into into helping them just stay in business over the next couple, 3-4 months. It is a very tough situation. Thank you.
Mr. Brandstetter. Oh. I saw you, Ms. Moss. You're next in the queue.
Mr. Mayor, I just had a question for Mr. Gum, I think, that I'm when we use the CDBG money and we establish a loan program, albeit forgivable perhaps, that went through. But with this money, and I'm looking at page 38 of our packet, where there is a discussion about where we can make loans to businesses, unlike the CDBG, which would be money that would revolve. With this money, if we make it a loan program and someone pays back, we have to send the repaid loan back to the federal government. Is that how I'm reading that comment on page 38?
I believe you are correct. It's as I read it as well. That is true.
So I would say that the administration to do loans and then collect them back and do that only to have to return that money to the Treasury, that while we may use CDBG money for loans, that this money should probably be focused at grants, so that the money doesn't just fly off to the other Washington at some point in time.
All right, Ms. Moss, waiting patiently.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In reference to the comments that were made, I think it was Councilmember Farmer, about the dollar amount that was allowed. My question to Ms. Newton is, if those dollars are not used for the resource that they've been allotted for, can you be flexible enough to move that into another category or to another area?
Ms. Moss, so are you asking to move it to another category for, I'm not sure.
If it's not used. If it's not used for the purpose intended, if they don't need all of it, can you move it someplace else?
I think that you could, absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That might solve some of the concerns that we have since we don't know.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
I think, yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Weighing in, and I forget who was commenting on it, but as far as the small business and grants and rent, seen some national economic commentary that the pandemic has caused a great wealth transfer, and that the larger corporations are going to recover in a V because they had a pause in capital. But the money's flowing out of the small businesses. Most of the aid has gone to, whether it's directly to individuals or to subsidize paying individuals, but that overhead, particularly the rent that keeps running for the small businesses, is causing massive failures. And so if they're right, that may be a point of emphasis that we want to keep a close eye on if we're not, if not actually increasing what we're doing in that regard, because Lakewood is, if nothing else, a hotbed of very small businesses. We have literally hundreds and hundreds of them, and their rent didn't stop. Any other comment, questions? Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to pick up on something Councilmember Farmer was talking about. And again, I apologize to staff if it sounds like we're micromanaging here. But I agree with the point that some of that money, I think, should be moved more toward the human service aspect of it, specifically small businesses and human services. So this leads me to my question. Are we required to have a 10% reserve of $179,000? And if we are, why?
We are not, Mr. Simpson. And what you see actually between the May 26th version and tonight's version of the budget is that actually was reduced from 10% down to 2% because the money was transferred to other areas within the budget. And so really, this is a microcosm unto itself. You have this amount of money and it's up to the city to determine how it wants to spend it. These are recommendations coming to you from the staff that have worked with outside entities as well as coordinated with the other departments as to how money has been spent so far and where we anticipate as best we can, it might be needed.
Okay, so this, what I read in my packet, that $179,000 is not in fact correct.
No, and let me clarify this once I can get it open for you, or not. Sorry. Yeah, the version of the budget that came to you in your packet is outdated because since then we did receive some actual sum up of what happened with payroll as well as what happened with some of the facilities costs. So the 179 is now down to about $31,000 for the reserves.
So the numbers allocated are also would be, there'd be an upward shift in, say, money for business assistance and human services.
Yes, those were both increased between the packet that you received and what was presented tonight.
All right.
So it was just a matter of trying to gather all of the cats and ducks or whatever you think I should be herding at the moment to try to get this to you. We just couldn't get it all done by couldn't get it all done by the deadline last week.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So I had one other question I forgot to ask. I'm sorry. Do we have any data that shows there's an uptick in domestic violence that needs to be addressed? Because it need and the reason I say that is that in order for this money to be used, there has to be an impact of the virus. And nationally, the statistics don't, well, I should say regionally anyway, the statistics don't seem to bear out the thought that domestic violence was going to increase, just like they don't bear out the thought that that homeless shelters were going to be the hotbed of infection. For some reason, the assumptions were way off in both regards. And so do we have any local information, or is this something we reserve, and when people get out and about and the taverns are open again, is it going to go up? I just don't know, but how are we going to tie it to a coronavirus impact if we don't have any statistics?
I'd ask Mr. Humphries to answer that.
Yeah, I don't have all the notes from our collaboration meeting in front of us, but we got quite a bit of data from Rebuilding Hope, YWCA, and Tacoma Community House. Not all of it definitive, some of it's kind of implying. We do know some data locally that the number of, like, Rebuilding Hope has said there's a pretty, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but a significant increase in calls for medical assistance, which is usually related to a sexual assault. There's been an increase in number of calls in late hours, especially from youth. And those youth have said that 79% of them, the national statistic is there's a dramatic increase in the number of youth calling for domestic services, and 79% of those youth say that they are quarantined with an abuser. And those calls are coming around midnight and 1 a.m. when they can find some time. So, and I don't have all the local data. We do have some data, and we do have some assumptions that as things open up, we're going to hear more when survivors and victims have the opportunity to ask for help.
So that's my concern. What we've heard is that there are assumptions, and every provider assumes The actual statistics seem to be that when the lockdown came, the number went way down. The assumption is that that's because somebody's locked up with their abuser and they can't call. The numbers have gone up on the same seasonal pattern as they normally do, but year over year, they're down. So I just want to make sure that before we put it out there, that we make sure the money's qualified. So on data, not assumptions. So. Any other comments or questions? Mr. Caulfield.
Thank you, Mayor. So question for the mayor and the council. So this is scheduled to come forward to you for consideration to move forward with begin drawing down the money as well as making it available to the community. So, heard a lot of comments this evening regarding where the money should go. And rather than us trying to guess what the 7 of you would like to do, can I get some consensus or direction in terms of the dollar amounts that you would like to see, at least by major category, so we can bring that back to you next week if that's in fact your desire?
So Ms. Spear, what's the summary page on? Because my
Yeah, I'm getting it open
over
for
here
you.
keeps shutting off.
I'm getting it for you right now, Mr. Mayor. So that is the summary page. And Mr. Simpson, again, my apologies. This is showing the difference between what you saw in your packet over this last weekend to tonight, given more information.
Well, let's see. I can't see that and the participants at the same time. We have Mr. Simpson. You're muted, John.
Sorry about that. The city manager asked a question, so I'm going to just give him a ballpark figure. I'd like to see human services and businesses, those two areas, increased by 10% apiece, which means from the numbers above it that I just saw on Tiffany's screen, we start taking out a percentage point here, a percentage point there to make that 10% for both business and human services a reality. Again, it's a starting point.
Others, Mr. Branstetter.
Mr. Mayor, I actually, when I look at the numbers and think that as we as a council want to lock them in that first column of where there's an amount for reserve, the 2%, and the internal number, but that we don't budget to any of that business assistance and human services. I'd like to just see us take those two numbers and move them closer together so that that 50%, that they're each 25%, that I'm not concerned about the column that says youth mental health, food, domestic violence, economic resilience under human services. I think the human services needs to identify what the right numbers are there if we just get that total amount there. But the balanced business assistance and human services, leave the rest of the numbers as they are.
Mr. Bolke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have one question before making a comment. I noticed on the sheet that we got with our packet, it was youth learning loss and mental health, and now it's just youth mental health. So we lost learning loss. Is there a reason for that?
Tiffany's attempt to fit it in a column of a certain size. nothing other than that. It's intended for the same reason, the same purpose.
Okay, I'm with the two other gentlemen. I think that, and I think Ms. Farmer earlier mentioned it. I think the one I would go back to, because they are a good partner with us, but I think maybe if you need more money for business assistance and human services, is to go back to West Pierce and renegotiate that number. That would be my my suggestion. It seems like that's where you could find additional funds. Maybe I don't know if that's a negotiated figure already, or that was just a number they threw out and we said, yeah, we can do that. Which I'm not casting dispersions on that, because they are a very good partner of ours, and their health is important, because they we need to make sure that they can respond. But I think given the circumstances, and if you need additional funding, maybe that my suggestion would be to go back to them and say, we think we can help you out, but we can only do X rather than Y. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Ms. Farmer.
I'd like to take Mr. Brandstetter's idea about bringing the two, the business assistants and the human services assistants to about 25% each, and raise him 10% on each, so that they're about 35% each. And I was actually thinking along the same lines. Hey, I'm new. Wait, just got me the new card. And I was thinking along the same lines as Mr. Boki on taking a second look at the West Pierce numbers, and that hurts my heart, definitely.
Mr. Whalen.
Well, I think I spoke my piece earlier, but as long as we can ensure that there's sufficient general language under the business assistance category to include some of the nonprofit businesses in the city that could use some assistance, I'd be fine with the numbers and the higher percentages.
And I think I'm along the same lines as Ms. Farmer. I'd like to see those two categories in the 30 to 35% range. And as general as possible. None of the itemization like KWA, food assistance, just the blocks. So for the ordinance to keep this moving, we can go out with RFPs and see what's there. And as long as staff knows that those general categories is what we're looking at, we can be more flexible. KWA may have all its money next week for that meal program, for example. We wouldn't want to be locked into an ordinance and have to come back and change that. So I think as general as possible is good, and to up the business and human services categories just to general. I think it's business and or nonprofits. Nonprofits are a business of a type of business, and some of these programs, they aren't in others. So whatever the parameters are.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We'll get that out and ready for you for next week.
Okay, well, so you have to conjure up something that comes close to what we've given you guidance on, which is not consistent. So good luck.
We'll do our best.
Thank you. And so you're still on the hot seat, Ms. Spiro, as we move to a review of the 2020 annual development regulations and multifamily tax exemption code amendments.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And I will again share my screen. So bear with me just one moment, please. All right. So beginning this evening, you are looking at what we're calling an annual development regulation amendment package, but I think this is actually the first time this type of a package has come to the City Council. In any event, this is a wide-ranging, both Title 18A, but also a number of other titles within the Lakewood Municipal Code, just various and sundry amendments. And this is coming from the Planning Commission. On June 3rd, they did take action on a resolution that contained their recommendations for Titles 1, 12, 14, 15, 17, and then 18A, where the bulk of them are. Some of these amendments are actually Scrivener errors that have been discovered since 18A in its new form went live, and both staff and members of the public have been accessing and using that code. But then there's also other items that have come up because of state statutory or regulatory changes or case law changes and or bill information coming from the legislature. So all of those things have dropped into this package. And again, there's a number of different things. One item to note for the council is that as part of their findings, the Planning Commission requested a review of chapter 17.17, which is a new chapter proposed regarding plat alterations, to consider whether or not there were maybe more restrictive requirements than there needed to be. Just to let the council know that before this chapter did go to the Planning Commission, the legal department reviewed it, and it was also based on statutory language at RCW 58-17-215. So within the package, you'll see in Title I, simply some changes to two sections of Chapter 1.36 related to hearing examiner appeals. There's a new definition of unopened city streets added to Title 12 for Public Works. There's just some changes to WAC references or Washington Administrative Code references within Title 14. Within Title 15, which is Buildings and Construction, there's references to the International Existing Building Code, or IEBC, recognizing that as a code that the city will rely on. And then within Chapter 17, updated cross-referencing with Title 12 within the Lakewood Code, as well as, again, that new Chapter 17 related to plat alterations. 18A is where most of the changes are included. Scrivener's errors, as I just mentioned, there are several new definitions added to the title, a new table at 1820.080, some sections changed in Chapter 18A20, the update of the SEPA appeal deadline within 1820 as well. PDD application requirements are updated in Chapter 18A30. There's an update to the density and minimum lot sizes within the R1 zone. There's a removal of one section. There's the addition of a section regarding dangerous and objectionable elements in Chapter 18A40. There's some changes to uses and related footnotes within the use tables of Chapter 18A40 regarding accessory dwelling units or ADUs, boarding houses, special needs housing, and group homes. There's a new section regarding and regulating electric fences. There's been some question and interest in having those in certain industrial areas of the city. There are some changes regarding the size of ADUs for 18A40.110. There's the deletion of several out of date or obsolete ADU sections based on state legislative action. There's some new language regarding access to trash enclosures and sidewalks for safety reasons. And then there's amended parking standards within alleys for Chapter 18A80. A couple of questions that may be in somebody's minds regarding ADUs. There have been 9 approved since 2015, where right now there's a restriction in the code that an owner of a property has to occupy either the primary or the ADU, should there be one. That now has been eliminated by state legislative action, so it'll come out of our code. But if the owners don't object to dropping the restriction on an existing ADU, the city can rescind that for existing properties. The ADUs are not part of the rental housing safety program right now, but they could be. And then would we require the rental housing safety program as part of an ADU ordinance? The response back is that yes, but that may be complicating the authority and process that Community and Economic Development have developed under the ability to do administrative rules for this program. The other piece that's within this package is an entirely new chapter regarding the multifamily tax exemption program. Lakewood has had this now for a while, but after researching and seeing what's gone on in City of Tacoma code language, which is what it was originally based on, as well as state law review, the recommendation here is to streamline and simplify the city's process. Right now, there's city action to identify what's called a tax incentive urban use center, and then following that, residential target areas. And then once an RTA is established, the multifamily tax exemption is available within that RTA. The state law and Tacoma both have done away completely with this tax incentive urban use center idea, and it's simply gone to RTAs. And so the suggestion here with this new chapter is to adopt code similar to what the city of Tacoma has done and to do away with the tax incentive urban use centers. Here you see the maps. On the left is the map of the TIUUCs, if you will. And then on the right, you see the RTAs. The two for the Central Business District and also Lakewood Station are the same boundaries. Where there is a difference is in Springbrook. You'll see that the TIUUC is almost the entire area, whereas the RTA within Springbrook is much smaller. So moving through this chapter, to summarize it, you've got definitions, you've got the requirements, the designation and standards process, and then the exemptions that are available. In addition, to summarize what's in the chapter, there's new definitions within 18A that would apply. It deletes the TIUUC, as I just mentioned, and then the RTA would be adopted by ordinance by the city council. RTA boundaries would be added now to comprehensive plan and zoning maps. It has new standards for the RTAs, and council discretion applies here also. And then there's right now within the city code language requirement that there's an annual report to the county assessor regarding the Lakewoods code, and that's duplicative to what's also required under the filing the final certificate of approval for the tax exemption. So removing that annual reporting back to the county. So where this sits is tonight is the study session about it. There's a public hearing scheduled for a week from tonight, and then unless something else were to change the schedule, the council action is scheduled for July 6th. So with that, I and Mr. Buer are here to answer any questions that the council may have.
Questions from council? Mr. Bulkey.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is on the tax exemption, and when I look at the text, it's the project must include at least 4 units, and that seems awfully small to me, because it seems like to be able to get these tax exemptions, we've been looking for kind of a superior build. In the downtown core, it was they were going to meet the standards of the downtown plan. 4 seems awfully small to me. That seems like a fourplex, right? That someone could just put in somewhere and ask. We don't have to give them the tax exemption, but they can ask for it. My question is around 4. How did you come up with the number 4, or is it just required by the state?
There is no requirement by the state. The number 4 stems from the language that we picked up from the city of Tacoma, and it was something that could be amended by Lakewood.
Okay.
This is Dave.
Mr. Buer.
I think the 4 may have also been a carryover from the previous ordinance. Let us go back and check on that.
Okay, I'd like to have some kind of discussion, and then I'd like to see what other cities, I mean, if everybody out there is doing 4, then you've convinced me, but I don't know that we're going to get the build, or the neighborhoods are going to get the build that they want. And I don't know that that's what we should be encouraging.
Okay.
Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, here, in your presentation, there was a point on your slide of where you talked about ADUs, and you mentioned that ADUs are currently not subject to the rental housing inspection program. And you said, but they could be. And the slide says would be. And that's slightly different meaning there. Is there What's the intent of the would could versions?
I would defer to Mr. Buer.
Mr. Buer.
Under our current code, accessory dwelling units, there is a requirement that one of the units be used by the property owner for a period or a minimum period of 6 months per year. As a result of some of the changes at the state level, that requirement goes away. So as a result, you could have 2 units on a lot, one an accessory dwelling unit and one the primary dwelling unit, both being rentals. And as such, if they were both rentals, there's an argument that can be made that it should be subject to the rental housing safety plan.
So in the ordinance that we're discussing and we're going to have a public hearing on, again, I'm back to the would or could item. Are we actually making that change that says that if there is not an owner occupied unit, it's subject to the rental housing safety program? Or does that have to be a change to a different ordinance?
The proposal does not require the city council to make a decision on whether or not accessory dwelling units should be a part of the rental housing safety program. As currently promulgated under the rental housing program, that is an administrative decision that is left up to staff to decide. That's already been adopted by ordinance. So at this time, myself and Mr. Gum are going to take a look at it and determine the efficacy of making rental housing a part of an accessory dwelling unit where the primary unit is rented out.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you, Ms. Spear and Mr. Buer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And we now move to a review of Pierce County Force Investigation Team, MOU with Ms. Wachter.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and members of the council. Heidi Wachter, City Attorney for the City of Lakewood. Tonight, we are actually circling back to something that was mentioned to the council a while ago, and that is the agreement that's coming before you tonight. Starting in the beginning, there's a Washington Administrative Code 139-12. It's the Law Enforcement Training and Community Safety Act, LETSCA for the abbreviated version. That act stems from a 2015 Department of Justice final report where they started looking into police uses of force long before what's currently going on. And they came out with a couple of recommendations. One is for clear and comprehensive policies on the use of force. Another, training on the importance of de-escalation, crisis intervention, and mental health, as well as the provision of first aid, and that investigations of force be completely independent of the involved agency. So in other words, agencies don't investigate themselves. What's before you in the form of the Pierce County Force Investigation Team agreement is insurance that we will have completely independent investigations. When this came on the agenda, we received several questions about some of the other aspects of the Washington Administrative Code, for example, clear and comprehensive policies, some of those sorts of questions. Those things are on the individual departments to meet those standards. The standard that we can't meet all by ourselves is how we handle these investigations. In order to handle these investigations in compliance with state law, we have to come to agreement with fellow agencies so that when things happen, we aren't scrambling to figure out how we're going to investigate them or anything like that. They just automatically go to the fellow agencies. This agreement has been reviewed, and we were coming to sort of the home stretch on it when our lives all changed dramatically and business processes changed dramatically. And so now it's looping back now that we're starting to get into the saddle with different agencies approving it. Because it is an interlocal agreement, meaning that all of the agencies involved are governmental entities, it does fall under the auspices of the Interlocal Cooperation Act. And that means that the legislative bodies authorize the joint action of the different jurisdictions. With regard to the other questions that have come out, Chief Zaro's here tonight to talk about how our department independently, for the areas that we're independently responsible for, is meeting those aspects, because I know that those are of concern to the council, and they certainly came through in some of the questions that we got in advance. So Chief Zaro, I will leave those other components to you.
All right, Chief.
Thank you, Mayor Anderson. First, can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So a couple of the, something to clarify is, this agreement was all the Pierce County police chiefs and the sheriff. The independent investigation can be met a couple different ways. One is to have any one outside agency do them. The other is to do sort of a cooperative approach. And the Pierce County Police Chiefs Association some months ago decided that the cooperative approach is the way to go. And actually, I volunteered to help sort of spearhead the effort, which is taking a little bit longer than I anticipated, but here we are. And that's with every agency in Pierce County agreed to sign on to this agreement. We currently have signatures from almost everybody. The two big ones are Pierce County and Tacoma. They have not yet signed, but it was the sheriff's idea for me to spearhead it. So I'm assuming that at some point they're going to move that direction. They are having some labor management issues that they're working through. And again, just to underscore and emphasize that this agreement only addresses the independent investigation portion of the new WAC and what was born out of I-940. Other things like de-escalation training, that is handled through the state. The state's putting on that training. That's up to each department to ensure that they are attending that training. It's not in this agreement, but that's not what this agreement was intended to address. If there's other specific questions, I'd be happy to answer those, but that's what this agreement's about. And again, some of the other independent things that are required are being addressed by the individual agencies.
Questions for Ms. Wachter or Chief Zaro? So is this formalizing, in some respects, isn't this formalizing what's been in the interim, an informal relationship where it's kind of done on a mutual aid basis?
Mr. Mayor and members of the council, to a degree, yes. What I would tell you is probably not hugely different, but now part of the WAC and a part of the WAC that we're meeting is there are specific requirements about citizen involvement and also regular communication to the public about the status of the outside investigation. And I would say that the part about citizen involvement is probably the most unique feature that would make this any different. But beyond that, you are correct. I would defer to the chief if I've missed something.
Mayor Anderson, in years past, what we've used is crew through our membership in the cooperative cities to do a joint investigation. But in those, we were actually a part of it. It wasn't completely independent. That was done mostly to share resources. But now, as with our recent one, it is still very similar, only we had absolutely nothing to do with it. What this agreement does is formalize that to a large degree, and then also includes the Sheriff's Department in the city of Tacoma.
In fact, isn't it correct that under I-940, if it's your department that's involved in an incident, you're excluded by the new statute?
Mayor, that is correct.
That's correct. And I want to point out too that this is our current best information. I read today that the governor is, I think in light of events in Tacoma, the governor is talking about maybe a new state agency to investigate incidents involving deadly force. So there might be more changes, but this is what we're working towards now.
All right. Questions for the chief, Mr. Whalen?
Thank you. I just had a question about the Section 8, the non-law enforcement community representatives. Chief, as you've heard out in the community, there's concern about that. So as I read this, so each member agency appoints one civilian to perform certain duties assigned by the WAC, and I didn't dig the WAC provision up to take a look at it. But how do you anticipate that civilian would serve on this particular board or committee, if you will, agency?
Sure. So that has been one that's, as Heidi pointed out, that's kind of the most unique part of this new agreement and the new law. As a group, because what we looked at was, just the broad range of populations we have in Pierce County, and knowing that, we have agencies from Buckley to Tacoma, and the city representatives or the community representatives are going to be vastly different from one jurisdiction to the next. So what we talked about is each jurisdiction recruiting who you can from your jurisdiction, and then we're actually going to pool them. So say we have an officer involved shooting and ours aren't available, or Buckley does and vice versa, they can draw on our community members to be their oversight. And one of the things that we're going to do once all the jurisdictions have their selected is get them all together, all the community members, introduce them, and then also just make sure everybody's on the same page as far as the process. But right now, that's how we see that working. Not every jurisdictions have selected their community members, us included. It's something that, probably short-sightedly, we're going to wait until we had the agreement signed, but that's something that, we need to move on quicker than we should have, but that's how we see it working.
As we've talked a little bit over the past week or so, the more we can communicate to the public about this existing process that's in place, the better for police departments around the area, ours included. I just think the more communication about good independent process, the better, including the inclusion of non-law enforcement community representatives. I think that's going to be a positive change that people will welcome.
Yeah, and I will say that the Chief Ramsdale from Tacoma, the sheriff, and I all went to a meeting of the Black Collective in December, maybe. It's been a few months, and told them that this is the direction we were moving. And just quite frankly, I maybe naively anticipated it moving quicker. And with all the delays, communication is something that fell off and should have been better about.
So, Chief, I understand correctly that each law enforcement agency in the county would have one non-law enforcement person appointed?
One or two. I think the jurisdictions, we had talked about two, so that there was, you could have one available or always have one available.
My concern here is that doing it that way instead of on some basis of population would create non-law enforcement representation that wasn't indicative of the demographics of the county. Tacoma gets one and Lakewood gets one, and Buckley and Orting and Sumner, Puyallup get one. You don't reflect the different communities in the county in the demographics. You skew it. And I think that's going to come in for immediate criticism. So I think we need to look at that to make sure that it's reflective of our community.
One of the things I'll say about that is that we're not just restricted to one. And one of the things that the WAC references is that the community members that are selected they represent people that are traditionally disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system and by police use of force. So I think by virtue of that, even your Buckleys and your Pacifics need to look for people that are just that are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system, which is, I think, commonly recognized or widely recognized as being people of color.
Mr. Volkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This, I guess, for the chief or for Ms. Wachter about the citizen representative or the non-law enforcement community representative. How do they fit in this thing? I mean, if I'm just somebody who's interested in the subject, but do I get to go to all the meetings? Do I get to see all the evidence? I mean, what's my role in this? And I mean, I guess my concern is that they could just be shunted aside during the process.
Well, Councilmember Boki, I would start by saying, as we've all acknowledged, this is a unique feature. It's not something that we've actually got a template to work from. I think the intent is that non-law enforcement has enough access to the process that it gives some assurance that the independent nature of the process and the access that these citizens would have help give the community some assurance that the process is adequate. I would also tell you, though, that they are trying to balance that against the fact that citizens do not have the same training as the people who will be investigating. The investigators are independent, but they also have particular skills and experience that give us a reliability about their ability to look at the situation and know what's happened. So what they're trying to do is put out there that balance of public access sufficient to see what's going on at proper stages and have information, but not interfere with the legitimacy of the investigation from the skill perspective. And I'd again defer to the chief as far as his understanding of that.
Chief.
Thank you. And actually the WAC is fairly prescriptive about what the role is of the civilian member. It is not to be within the tape, so to speak, and conducting the investigation. It's to have some role in reviewing who is assigned to this team. It's to be there when the involved agency is debriefed, so they hear all the information, and it's to review any press releases that go out as well. So it is fairly prescribed. So it's not, there shouldn't be a whole lot of gray area. It's just going to be up to us to communicate that clearly to the members that do, or the community members that do have an interest in being a part of this.
Ms. Farmer.
I think the addition of a civilian member is a huge step in the right direction, because there's a misperception about, oh gosh, this is going to be so independent. They're protecting their own, whether or not they're from across the county or they're investigating themselves. And so I think this is a step in the right direction to opening that up and being as transparent as possible.
I'll say too that one of the things that we will, from my perspective, that I want the people going in to understand is that no matter how independent, there will always be people that say, well, you're too close to the police. You know, there's always going to be that allegation that you're too close, you've developed a friendship, you're not objective enough. So the people that get on board or that become a part of it need to know that as well, that they'll be likely subject to some of the same allegations. But you're right, it is absolutely a step in the right direction.
Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, Chief, if you could just clarify on the community member a little bit, because we're going to have somewhere between 20 and 30 appointed community members in the county. But for any specific incident being investigated, is that entire group providing oversight, or is one person or two people from that group assigned to do some oversight with that investigation team?
It'd be one or two, and it would be from, I mean, ideally, like if it was a Lakewood incident, it would be our citizens that are a part of it. So that's how it would work, and it would not be the whole group. It would just be our two that come out and are involved in that agency, if they're available. If not, we do have the pool concept that we talked about, where we could draw on the representatives from other agencies to come in.
Okay, and given the requirements that the agency, the city itself, have nothing to do with the investigation, that then our citizen representatives wouldn't be reporting things back to you or us about what's going on?
No, they wouldn't. Their role would be to, like I said at the outset, to I guess approve or review who gets assigned to the team. They will review the confidentiality agreements, or the conflict of interest statements that the investigators sign, declaring whether or not there's any sort of conflict with the people involved in the investigation. They would review those, and then they would review the any press releases. But they wouldn't have a chance to review any evidence or any facts of the case until I was briefed. So they would sit in on those briefings, but until that happened, they would be as in the dark as I would be.
Okay, and do they write a report?
Oh, they do not, no.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions for the chief or Ms. Wachter?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen.
Not so much as a question as a comment. So I just pulled up the WAC. It's 139.12.020. It's or 030, excuse me. Very thorough and actually quite informative. And so that may be something we may wish as an after action comment on the city council meeting tonight, to post that on the website somewhere. It's state law, and I think it's actually quite helpful for people to read it. I wish I would have pulled it up before tonight, before now. It's pretty good. It talks about independence, transparency, communication, credible process, and credible investigators, which is exactly what we have heard a lot in the last couple of weeks. And to the extent the state and local agencies are now embracing that concept, it would be really helpful to kind of get that communique out the door so people know that process is happening, positive process, which I think is good.
And I did speak with Bryn Grimley a little bit about that earlier today, about developing, I guess, a communication plan or how to get some of this, the best way to get a lot of this information out to the public.
Yeah, and a lot of folks, Bryn does it as well, where she'll post a link to something so people could click on the hyperlink and read it if they're so inclined to do so, and that kind of thing.
Right.
Some that are tech savvy, right, Ms. Farmer? Others may not be.
Any other questions, comments from council? Well, thank you very much, Ms. Wachter and Chief Zarro. And we'll now move to comments from the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Some updates. Like as you're aware, this weekend we had two very peaceful demonstrations and marches here in Lakewood, one on Saturday and the other on Sunday. We have been made aware that there is going to be another one on this Wednesday at noon, beginning at Fort Steilacoom Park. We are working to reach out to the organizer to try and get an understanding of what is planned so that we can provide any level of assistance that they may need in support of their event. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. You know, on Friday, the State Department of Health did approve Pierce County to move to phase 2 of Safe Start. So we are now allowed to operate under that level. It does include certain restrictions. For example, restaurants can only be at 50% capacity and certain retail stores at 30% capacity. And there's kind of a laundry list of items there. It also allows, you know, salons and barbers and other personal grooming services to open. In support of that, earlier today, we did send out some information as well as sharing it and posting it on our homepage of the city's homepage, as well as our COVID-19 webpage, some information that the Tacoma Pierce County EDB and the Tacoma Pierce County Chamber of Commerce has put together as it relates to resources for businesses to assist them as they are allowed to reopen. I think earlier, I think our economic development manager, Becky Newton, mentioned the distribution of personal protection equipment to businesses, actually very, very timely. That occurred on Thursday, and I want to thank Dr. Joyce Loveday at the Clover Park Technical College for making her facility or her grounds available to do this. And we had about 550 businesses that actually came through, and just in time to take advantage of that. And it was a great partnership between our team here at the city and Pierce County, as well as, again, Clover Park Technical College to be able to accommodate that. Also last week, some not so positive news. We received an update from Phillips Publishing. They do our Connections magazine, and they informed us that because of COVID-19 and the economic impacts, they are not going to be able to continue as a viable business beyond, I think it's July or so. However, they are going to complete our Summer Connections magazine, which is currently in the process of being prepared and will be sent out on or about June 30th. So with that, what we plan on doing is moving forward with an RFP for printing and publishing services, and we're going to get that underway here in the next week or two. Also relating to COVID-19 and the CARES Act. So the Congress appropriated $1.5 billion to the Economic Development Administration, which is an arm of the federal government, to provide support for infrastructure projects. And the Seattle region, which includes Washington State, as well as some other states here in the Pacific Northwest, has been allocated $266 million. So our team here at the city has had some conversations with personnel from EDA, as they're known as, to talk about eligible infrastructure projects. There is a 2-year window in terms of when the monies need to be spent once awarded. Kind of the sweet spot for projects, the advice that we have been provided is between $1.5 and $3 million. And so right now our Public Works Engineering Department, as well as our Economic Development team, are looking at a number of projects, including 146th over in Woodbrook. We just received some design monies from the Port of Tacoma to do that, as well as looking at perhaps some downtown sub-area projects. For example, the traffic intersection at Alfreda and Gravely Lake Drive. Another is the traffic signal at Steilacoom and Durango, which again, we received some design monies a number of years ago from Port of Tacoma to design. So applying for construction monies through this program, might be, worth the opportunity. So those are just some examples. There's a number of other projects we're looking at. But the good news is that there could be some infrastructure improvement dollars that come down here through the city of Lakewood. So more to follow on that. Also, traditionally, the match has been 50-50. However, the EDA has commented that based on the ability of municipalities to pay, they would be willing to go to 80-20, where we come up with a 20% match, or even 100% with no match. And they recognize, the challenges that local governments are currently facing. Also, in the realm of infrastructure improvements, Public Works Engineering was alerted that the state is now taking applications for Safe Routes to School grants. And so we've identified 3 that we think will compete fairly effectively. One is either a signal or some kind of enhanced crossing at Military and Holden in support of the Dr. Claudia Thomas Middle School. Another is in support of Lakes High School along Far West Drive and filling in some missing sidewalks along that corridor. And then 112th between Gravely Lake Drive and Highland Avenue again, some sidewalk links in support of Clover Park High School. Traditionally, high schools don't rank very well, but we think given kind of the issues that we have here in our community that they will. So more to follow on that. In addition, the state has opened up application for bike and pedestrian grants. Quite frankly, I'll just be upfront with you. I think, as you know, in the past, we haven't had much luck obtaining these grants, but we're going to go ahead and pursue them. One is at 84th and Pine for an enhanced crosswalk, as well as sidewalks on the north side of Steilacoom Boulevard between 83rd and 87th, as well as sidewalks on South Tacoma Way and between 88th and 80th, which is the last link of South Tacoma Way. So we're going to continue to evaluate those and see how they apply up to the criteria that the state has, and we'll certainly keep you posted on that. I think, as I mentioned last week, I believe that through the PSRC transportation funding process, unfortunately, we did not rank well enough to gain funding in support of our roadway projects, particularly South Tacoma Way between 88th and 80th, as well as Steilacoom Boulevard, the next phase of Steilacoom Boulevard from Weller to 87th or 83rd. I can't remember off the top of my head what that range was. However, we did rank very high on 2 preservation projects. However, we're only going to get funding for one of them, which is going to be South Tacoma Way between 96th and Steilacoom Boulevard. One of the questions Mr. Busich and I have had looking at, who's been awarded funding, not just this cycle, but going back the last 5 or 6 cycles, is why are some cities seeming to get a lot of money? And by the way, we need to be careful, because in 2014, the city of Lakewood, we received almost $6 million across, I think it was 5 or 6 projects. But at the same time, there are a couple of smaller cities that seem to consistently receive funding. And one of the things that we have asked for is to look at the rating sheets in terms of how the scores are calculated. That's never been disclosed. And we would just, in terms of full transparency, we would like to see that. And so Mr. Busich is working with the staff at Pierce County, as well as his colleagues in the other cities, to try and get an understanding of that. This might be a topic of conversation for the elected officials at PCRC, which would be Councilmember Farmer and Councilmember Boki, if I recall. And Mr. Busich and I might want to schedule some time to talk with you about this here in the near future. At the end of the day, the staff team that pulls this together, they kind of create their own rules. And, they're good ones, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, we feel, and some other cities have mentioned this as well, that there seems to be a bit of an inequity across the board in terms of the allocation of funding and support of roadway projects. So again, more to come on that. You may have heard me mention about a month or 2 ago that we had applied for some risk mitigation grants through WCIA, one for a speed radar and the other for a sidewalk grinder. Well, I'm pleased to announce that they did award funding to the city for us to be able to go out and purchase a sidewalk grinder. And, those become very effective. We have sidewalk panels are pushed up because of roots and things along those lines. So we're going to go ahead and proceed with that acquisition. We did not get funding for the speed radar. We didn't expect to get funding for both, but one or the other. But again, this is another great program that WCIA has for its members. Also, the reason that the city of Lakewood for a number of years did not receive funding from this program is because I served on the executive committee for a number of years, including being president up until a couple of years ago. And so if you're on the executive committee, your city doesn't get mitigation grant funds because that's the group that makes the decision. But now that I'm off, we can apply. So we applied, and I want to thank Mr. Busich and Ms. Dodsworth actually as well for spearheading this. And the grant is $12,000. I think, as you're aware, Western State Hospital is moving forward with their facilities master plan. They have submitted it to the city. We have deemed it complete. The city of Lakewood, we are the lead SEPA agency on this, and the state is okay with us at this point in time doing that. The proposal, the kind of at the 10,000 foot level, the proposal is for Western State Hospital to build a 350 bed forensics hospital on the property. That is going to require the demolition of several existing buildings on site. It also includes building an 18-bed residential cottage at the Child Study and Treatment Center, which is over off toward 87th, as well as a new community residential treatment facility, or RTF, of 48 beds as well. Right now, the goal of Western State Hospital is to transition to primarily a forensics facility, meaning their civil commitment patients would over time be moved off of Western State Hospital. And right now, the majority of the 800 beds down there are civil commitment to other places throughout the state. Now, when that's going to occur, we do not know. But again, they are moving forward with this. And given that the city is the lead SEPA agency, we have opened up the public comment period. There's a 30-day notice of application comment period that is going to begin this Wednesday, June 10th, and will run through Friday, July 10th. We're sending out 750 notices to the surrounding property owners, and that's going to occur here in the next day or two. We're also sending notices to all Lakewood neighborhood associations, multiple outside public agencies, both inside and outside the city, special interest and advocacy groups, also regional planning agencies such as the Pierce County Regional Council, Sound Cities Association, Thurston Regional Planning Committee, and PSRC, and organizations like that. Also, we learned that the TNT is looking at running a story this week to coincide with the city's public comment notice. And Mr. Bureau was essentially talked with the TNT late last week about what's going on down there. I'm sure they talked with Western State Hospital and/or DSHS as well. And I know they had asked to speak with Mayor Anderson, and I believe the mayor is looking to speak with the reporter here in the next day or two. The city, we have also created a standalone website called wshmasterplan.org, which will go live this Thursday or there's about. And it'll be, again, an opportunity for people to come and see all the material specific to the master planning process, as well as comments and feedbacks, and just be able to participate in the process as well. And down at Fort Steilacoom Park, so the barn that, if you're looking at the H barn, there's a barn off in the back to the left. It's an older barn. It's not used for anything or storage. It's empty. Earlier today, a tree fell on it and crushed it. Or crushed a good portion of it. And so we're going to secure the site if it hasn't already been done, post no trespassing, things along those lines. Obviously there's no way to rebuild that. And so similar to the barn that came down next to it, you might recall back in, I think it was 2015 or 16, we'll now move forward with abating that. And that's going to require us to go through a fairly detailed process with the state of Washington to take that down. Lastly, wanted to make the council aware that tomorrow myself, our senior policy analyst, Shannon Kelly Fong, and our state government relations team is going to meet with State Representative Jake Fye, who is chair of the House Transportation Committee. The purpose of meeting with him is twofold. The first, to provide him an update on our Lakewood Landing project, as well as our desire to relocate the WashDOT maintenance facility and the importance of LRF, local revitalization financing, and/or TIF, to be able to move that to allow for development within that area. And it's an opportunity for him to learn more about the project. The second purpose of the meeting is to hear from him as chair of the Transportation Committee, a project that he is spearheading, which actually is a very good one. And that is to add an HOV lane, to continue an HOV lane from 38th in Tacoma all the way down to Thorn Lane. Now that, you know, we would like to see that go all the way down to the Nisqually Bridge. And then of course points south over the bridge. But in any event, you know, our purpose tomorrow is to listen to the representative and get an understanding of what the proposal is. We do understand that he is not looking to do the, what I would call the just painting, which would be kind of, you know, you might recall in 2017, WashDOT prepared a study for this corridor that identified several options. The real simple option, if you will, was to essentially put down paint and squeeze in 5 lanes where there's 4. We understand that Representative Fye desire is to go with really the better option, which is to construct a brand new lane, which would result in a number of interchange improvements that would be required, including at Bridgeport and Gravely Lake Drive, as well as a number of bridges that probably would have to be addressed. And in Lakewood, that would be South Tacoma Way, 47th, and New York Avenue bridges. So again, our purpose tomorrow is to learn more about what his proposal is and what his idea is. And I'm sure he's going to want at some time in the future our feedback on that. So again, just wanted to give you a heads up on that, and I'll be more than happy to report out on what happened at that meeting next week. So with that, council, that's my report. Thank you.
Questions for the city manager? Ms. Farmer.
2 questions. I don't know if it's appropriate, but would the council be interested in, or would it make sense to have a presentation on the Western State Hospital stuff at a study session?
If there's a desire for council to do that, we can, you know, bring forward what we've received from DSHS at this point in time. I can check with our team on that.
I would really like that, and I think it would help us to elevate the conversation and get it out there, and it would give a chance for us to talk about how important this is to us.
I think it would also heighten public interest when there's a public participation portion of their process.
Cool.
Mr. Whalen.
And just a question, Mr. Caulfield, on the meeting with Mr. Fye. Do our 28th district folks know that we're having the meeting, and would it be helpful to kind of clue them in and we're pursuing that, at least from an education standpoint?
I believe our government relations team is in contact with our legislators from 28th to give them a courtesy heads up. And if it hasn't happened, it will happen. But this is something that both the city and Representative Fye has been wanting to do for some time. So
no, it makes good sense. I just wonder, it might help bring the others along. The more education, the more traction it gets, it would be helpful.
I would note that I was in on a conference call where in spite of the anticipated budget difficulties at the state level, the governor expressed interest in capital budget for infrastructure. And when asked how it might be paid for, it was suggested that the state still had borrowing capacity. So they might mortgage an infrastructure projects or infrastructure projects. So, any other questions for Mr. Caulfield? Well, then we'll go to council comments. And it looks like the Brady Bunch. We have a perfect 9-person square here. Why don't we start with Ms. Moss?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to report out that on Friday, I was able to participate in the Lakewood United meeting. It was their first Zoom meeting, and I was the guinea pig. it worked. The questions that they had was basically pertaining to the budget and how the city was faring behind it all. And the comments that I got back was the fact that they appreciated the hard work that's being done by the staff there at the city, and they made the comment that the city has a good staff, and I had to agree with them on that. So, Mr. Caulfield, that's one for you. I wanted to also thank Mr. Deputy Mayor and Ms. Councilmember Farmer for participating in the march on Sunday. I'm sorry. It was a good experience for me, and I learned a lot just listening to the people talk. I think everything went really good. There was a point that they kind of lost me when they started talking about some of the things that they had. I think there's an opportunity for us to do some talking and listening to the chief this afternoon. I mean, when he gave his report, I like the idea that he's going to be putting together that committee. So that was one of the things that had been suggested. An outside person looking in on being a part of the police committee. And also, let's see, I like the suggestion of the education piece. That is something that is definitely needed in the community because there's a lot of misinformation being shared and being understood that it is facts and it's not. So with that, Mr. Mayor, that's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Branstetter.
I have nothing.
Go to the position of Alice, Ms. Farmer. You're in the
Now you're making me think. That's what the 70s. That was so long ago. I too wanted to echo the comments of Ms. Maz and to reflect on the protest march on Sunday. It was one of the most impactful things I've ever been a part of in my 50 odd years on this planet. In the middle of a downpour, and to hear the eloquent, heartfelt, passionate pleas for action were incredibly moving. And we got a note back from the organizer afterward, thanking us for listening to them vent. But I thought it couldn't be further from the truth. They were not venting. They were eloquent, heartfelt pleas for action. We marched down the middle of streets, also something I've never done before. And thanks to our police department for directing traffic. The motorists, they were extremely inconvenienced, but they were so incredibly supportive. Almost to a car, they had their windows rolled down. They had their fists up. They were supportive. They were in solidarity. They were in tune with the march. It was amazing. It was very touching for me. And I sit here in my very whiteness, trying to figure out how to move forward. We're at a moment in history where we have the opportunity for real change, and nothing will change unless the people in power do something, and that's us. So I'm really anxious to work with the rest of you on figuring out how we can move forward. I've got some ideas. I know that several of you, I'm sure, have ideas. I'd be interested in possibly a short-term ad hoc task force made up of diverse community members, those folks who are disproportionately impacted by the use of police force. I'd like to talk about where we stand with body cams and dash cams, de-escalation training. I think I hear a lot about that, but I'm interested in what ideas we have of things that we haven't tried before, because clearly it's been years and we haven't seen a lot of change. So I'm interested in affecting change. Thank you.
Mr. Volkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just just a few words. I do support Ms. Farmer's remarks about dash cams. I think we've got some on some of the cars. I know body cams are quite a bit more problematical in this state because of the Open Public Record, the Public Records Act. There were a couple of things I wanted to discuss, though, in regards to the topic of the day. And it looks like from what I'm seeing tonight that the governor is going to convene a task force to talk about the use of chokeholds. So rather than ask about what chokeholds we use and which ones we don't and what restrictions we have on our officers on that, I think I'll go with the governor on this one, and that they're gonna have a policy come out, statewide policy, and I would assume that we would follow along with that statewide policy. I am though concerned about one of the stories that was out there nationally, and it had to do with the use of the no-knock warrants, which I guess I'd never really given much thought to, but the results were not good, and someone lost their lives. And there is some question as to the need for no-knock warrants. So one of the things that I would like the city manager to do is find out if we use them, if we do no-knock warrants, when do we use them, and how often we have used them. And then I think as a council, and I'll leave this to the other members of the council, that we need to, after we get that information in a few weeks or a month, we need to have a discussion if that's something that we want to continue to allow. If in fact we do allow, we may not. So, and because I think that would be something tangible that we could do that I think would, but there may be good reasons for it. And so but I think it's something we need to discuss. I would, as an aside, and for closing remarks, is that in Miranda v. Arizona, I think for you two lawyers on the council, that when Miranda rights were first brought in, and I don't know how long ago that was, 50s or the 60s, that there was thinking that this was going to be very bad, that this was going to make convicting criminals harder and various things like that. But actually, I read things where they said, no, it actually, because reading the rights so that the individual actually knew what their rights were, actually helped the police and prosecutors prosecute cases, because the people actually knew. And so if the guy confessed later on, but he had been read the rights. So sometimes when we initially think that things are not going to work out, that if we change the rules, they may not work, that they're going to make things more difficult. In the end, they actually make things better. And so let's just keep an open mind about things and go from there. So that's all I got.
Mr. Simpson.
No comments, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Whalen.
Thank you. It's been an interesting week, and the culmination of it, as you've heard from Council members Moss and Farmer, was the march on Sunday. It was a downpour, I have to say, but it didn't dampen the spirit, so to speak, of the folks who were there. And as I've mentioned several others, I had my wife Gail and my 8-year-old daughter Allison with us, and I think it was important for Allison, as a young student of color, of white color, I should say, to observe the heartfelt expressions of angst, frustration, lack of confidence in the system that many in our communities of color feel and experience. And so to be a part of that was helpful to me. And I think that it's critical for all of us as leaders to take a moment to listen, because we may not have all the answers. Certainly we don't profess to have all the answers, but what we can do is listen and see how best we can work with others to create and carve out a path forward. The thing that's important to note, I think, for all of us here is not only is, our community of color, many colors in Lakewood, hurting, but I think there are many police officers and their families and children who are hurting too, because it is a challenge to serve in that profession, but it is a profession that warrants service. And we're lucky in Lakewood that we have incredibly dedicated officers that serve our community every day. And so I hope as we go through and go forward in this community conversation, that it's a conversation that's inclusive enough to have all facets of the institutional life we call the city of Lakewood, from electeds to our police department to all the other institutions. We have to be at the table and represented to be able to make positive change. I'm confident we can, and I was heartened by the discussion tonight and review of the recent state law that I think is going to be helpful as soon as we communicate that something is happening, and we can include more community members to make the whole process more transparent and better. So enough of that. It's been a busy week and a lot of Zoom meetings, as you have probably had. I was at CELT Community Engagement Leadership Team last week. I popped in for the school board meeting tonight. I wasn't able to communicate very well because I couldn't get my volume on or they couldn't see me, but we're all making it through with a lot of Zoom meetings, but I hope to see you all soon in person. Thank you.
Well, in light of recent events, I pause to think that we need to address use of force practices, training, et cetera, to make sure that they're fair, they're consistent. I think that needs to be done on at least a countywide basis. But I think one of the things we're seeing, the emotion, is not just a use of force thing. Statistically, it isn't. Statistically, the use of force isn't used disparately, at least not as much as you would be led to believe by recent events. But underlying that is the context in which it is used. And for that context, I'd like to send you, and apologies, Ms. Moss, I'm sure has her own experiences that don't need this. But I had one of the greatest mentors in my life, a friend, later in compliment to me, a client, was an African-American physician who was kind of my college advisor, my sports medicine doctor, a friend and advisor. And he taught me a lot of what you'll see in what the YouTube I'm going to forward to you. So don't respond because then it'll be a meeting. But within the next day or two, I'm going to send you a YouTube video of General C.Q. Brown Jr., the chief of the Pacific Air Force and the nominee to be the first African-American chief of staff of the United States Air Force, about what he's thinking and how he's essentially, as high a pinnacle as he has reached, how he leads in two lives. And it really struck me when I watched it, because I thought of my friend and what he taught me, and he's in it over 80 now. But he was very accomplished. My physician friend was a Yale grad, an all-American swimmer. His father was one of the highest ranking African-American Army officers of his time. So he'd led a very successful life, but it was still a dual life. And it's in that context, I think, that we need to understand the emotion that goes with what might seem like minor disparities. There are always the major disparities in the flashpoints, but it's the everyday things that I think are more important. So with that somber but in a way hopeful note, is there anything else further to come before the council? Well, then we'll be adjourned. Thank you.